The sky over Germany was a violent grey cage of smoke, fire, and steel. The anti-aircraft guns below pounded the clouds with black shrapnel bursts that shook the airframe of the B-17 Flying Fortress like an animal being torn apart. Inside the cockpit, Lieutenant John C. Morgan gripped the controls so tightly his knuckles went white beneath his gloves. Every second felt like the bomber was being hit by a sledgehammer. The smell of burning oil and cordite filled the flight deck, thick enough to taste. What had begun as a standard bombing run was now a desperate fight for survival. And Morgan knew it. Everyone aboard knew it. He had trained for chaos, trained to stay calm, trained to trust the machines and the men around him. But nothing in training ever resembled the nightmare unfolding around him in the summer of 1943. His pilot, Lieutenant Stanley Red Rodden, flew in the left seat. Morgan, serving as co-pilot, kept scanning their gauges, trying to steady a plane that no longer wanted to fly straight. 10 men, one airframe, all of them depending on each other as the formations scattered under the storm of flak. The worst hit came from behind. A Messerschmitt fighter roared out of the clouds on their left flank, cannons blazing. Shells ripped through the cockpit like a buzz saw. Glass exploded inward. Metal shrieked. A single round struck Rodden directly in the head. His body spasmed violently, blood spraying across the cockpit windows in a hot crimson arc. For one horrifying second, he remained conscious, but his eyes were empty, glassy, unfocused, already fading. His dying hands clamped onto the control column with unnatural strength. The Fortress rolled hard to one side. Morgan barely managed to grab the opposite yoke before the bomber flipped completely. He shouted for help, but the intercom was dead. One of the first things shredded in the attack. The engines roared like they were coming apart. Morgan could not hear anything except the rising scream of air rushing past the broken cockpit frame. He planted his feet, used his whole body weight, and forced the bomber level again. It felt like wrestling a giant. In that moment, he realized something that turned his blood cold. He was now flying the B-17 alone. He tried to pry Rodden's locked fingers off the controls, but the man was slumped forward, dead weight, literally, and any slip might send them all into a fatal dive. Blood dripped down Morgan's sleeve as he fought to keep the plane steady with one hand while holding Rodden's body upright with the other. He tried autopilot, couldn't reach it. Tried yelling again. Nothing. The communication cable had been severed. He had no idea if his crew was alive or dead behind him. No way to give orders. No way to coordinate. No way to bail out, even if he wanted to. Outside, German fighters swarmed like wolves chasing a wounded animal. The Fortress groaned, shook, and rattled with every hit. The metal skin vibrated under the strain of the engines. Morgan maneuvered as best he could, making wide, sluggish turns to stay with what remained of the formation. Every muscle in his body burned. Every second felt like it might be their last. Down in the fuselage, the rest of the crew fought blind, unaware the cockpit had turned into a slaughterhouse. The top turret gunner kept firing into the sky, chasing shadows of Messerschmitts. The radio operator, bleeding from shrapnel, struggled to send a distress call over equipment that sparked and hissed. In the waist section, a gunner tied a tourniquet around a friend's leg, while smoke seeped through the ribs of the fuselage. The bomber was dying, piece by piece. But it was still flying, because John Morgan refused to let go of the controls. Minutes stretched into half an hour, then an hour. Morgan's right shoulder went numb. His fingers tingled. His arm felt like it was filled with molten lead. The pilot's corpse kept sliding toward the controls, threatening to yank the plane out of the sky. Morgan locked his elbow against Rodden's chest and held him there, teeth clenched against the pain. He could feel the fuse of his strength burning away. He thought briefly about cutting the harness, letting the body fall backward. But if the hands tightened, even reflexively, the bomber would flip. So he endured. He fought. He held the fortress together with a single hand and sheer stubborn will. Eventually, the fighters peeled off. The distant horizon was a smear of grey and smoke. Morgan checked the fuel gauges, wild, inaccurate, dancing from the damage. 2 engines were losing oil. Another was coughing. The only chance they had was to try to reach England. He began the long turn westward, the airframe resisting him the whole way. Somewhere in the fuselage, a crewman finally crawled forward through the narrow tunnel and opened the cockpit hatch. When he saw the scene, he froze. Blood everywhere. The pilot slumped in the seat, nearly headless. The co-pilot holding him upright with one hand, flying with the other. It was a miracle the plane was in the air at all. Morgan shouted over the engines, telling the crewman to get back. There was nothing anyone could do unless they wanted to risk sending the bomber into a death spiral. Hours passed. Turbulence shook the fortress, and Morgan's vision began to blur from exhaustion. But each time the plane lurched, instinct forced him awake again. He had one promise in his mind. If the fortress stayed in the air, so would he, no matter the cost. When the North Sea finally appeared beneath them, it didn't seem real. They had crossed the front. They might actually make it home. But danger still stalked them. Weather, failing engines, structural damage. The clouds closed in. Visibility dropped. Morgan's arms trembled violently from strain. His left leg cramped so hard he nearly screamed. But the English coastline emerged like a ghost through the grey, and Morgan guided the bomber inland, engine by engine, inch by inch. One of the crew finally repaired part of the interphone. "We're over the coast," someone shouted. "We're going to make it." Morgan could not answer. He didn't have the strength to push the button. Smoke trailed behind them. Fuel leaked in shimmering ribbons from the wings. He began the landing approach blindly through the haze. The left wing suddenly dipped. An engine died. Morgan corrected instantly. He had nothing left to give, but he forced his body to comply. He dropped the landing gear. One wheel locked. The other barely moved. The runway rushed toward them. At the last moment, Rodden's dead body lurched again, twisting the controls violently. Morgan bit down, tasted blood, and hauled back with everything he had. The fortress slammed onto the ground in a shriek of sparks and torn metal. It bounced, skidded, an engine burst into flames, but it stayed whole. When the aircraft finally stopped moving, the crew burst out, some collapsing onto the runway in shock. Fire crews swarmed. Medics rushed aboard. They found Morgan still gripping the controls, unable to release his hand. His muscles had locked. He had held the yoke for nearly 2.5 hours. 9 men survived the mission. One man, John Morgan, was the reason. When he was told he would receive the Medal of Honor, he tried to decline. He said he only did what any man would have done. His crew disagreed. His commanders disagreed. History disagreed. Morgan went on to fly again, returning to combat missions even after the ordeal nearly crippled him. He never framed his medal, never bragged. Instead, he talked about the crew, their trust, their courage, their bond. What he did that day was not loud, dramatic heroism. It was endurance, loyalty, strength that doesn't shout, it just refuses to let go. In the long list of stories from the air war over Europe, his stands apart. A single man keeping a bomber alive through willpower alone. A pilot who died. A co-pilot who refused to let the rest follow him. A fortress that should have fallen, but didn't. Because one man would not let his crew die. If you made it to the end of this story, consider subscribing. It helps us bring more true stories of courage, sacrifice, and survival to life.